reading from the book of Luke, chapter 24, verses 38 through 40. He said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and feet.
Do you have a smartphone? Would you like to follow today's message? Get the YouVersion Bible app. Simply search for a live event, enter your zip code. You can follow the notes, read deeper into the text, and watch all the videos. Because when it comes to today's message, we have an app for that.
God is good, and all the time. I'm Pastor Paul Marzahn, and it's a joy to be here today with each and every one of you. I hope you're having a wonderful Mother's Day. Raise your hand if you had a mom. Raise your hand. Okay, keep your hand up if you're grateful for your mom. Awesome. Oh, that's a good start. That's a good start. Today we're talking about the book of Luke, and we've been walking through the book of Luke since the beginning of December. And we're almost to the end. We're at Luke chapter 24. We'll get to the scriptures in just a few moments. As we're walking through the book of Luke, we're looking right now at the post-resurrection experiences and how Jesus is connecting with his disciples after coming back from the dead. And last week we talked about the road to Emmaus, how he met them on the road and they began to recognize him, but they were still kind of not quite sure. And so today we're going to talk about how to connect with the reality of Jesus, how to connect with the reality of Jesus. And we're looking at how we have to kind of touch and see the miracle, if you will. Kind of touch and see, is Jesus real? And that's what he's kind of trying to demonstrate to his disciples. Talking about reality, I thought I'd take you back with our pastors. We went on a mission trip and kind of a learning trip on a thing called Exponential Conference in Orlando, Florida about 2 weeks ago. And while we're down there, we were with 5,000 pastors from around the nation, and we were all church planters. And so we talked about church planting, we worshiped together, it was an awesome time. But on our way back, we had some free time, and so we stopped by a place called the Bible Land Experience. Anybody been to the Bible Land Experience? Anybody? Just me? Okay. Well, it's kind of a cross between Disney World and the Holy Land, okay? If you can imagine that. It's a theme park, and what they try to do is recreate what it might be like to be in the Holy Land. So they have the Holy of Holies temple. You can go see what's called the scriptorium, which is really interesting archaeologically, an hour tour about ancient texts in Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic, and then early Tyndale Bibles and publishers of Bibles, and you get to see the martyrs who died in terms of like hearing their story about how they tried to preserve scriptures through the centuries. A lot of really good stuff. They had a mock-up to scale of what Israel would have looked like, or Jerusalem particularly, during the time of Jesus. But they also had some kind of weird stuff too, just being honest, okay? So we went to this passion play where all of a sudden, Jesus dies and goes to hell and he battles Satan, and Satan comes in on a Harley, and boom, 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 and they kind of have this thing where they're fighting and Carmen's playing in the background, and I don't know, it's just kind of weird, but it was fun. We got to kind of see Jesus win, and he ever clapped, and then we had this scene where we went to the upper room and we got to experience Jesus by having communion with him, which was kind of cool. And then they have this theme park area where you can go interact with Jesus. I kid you not. So I have some pictures of some of our other pastors. I have Pastor Russ here. He's walking on water with Jesus. There we go. And and Jesus is calming the storm. And Pastor Russ is like, "Hey, I want to hop in there and do that." So we have Pastor Laura. She's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus is praying, and so she's helping him out there or tickling him. I'm not sure what's going on there. And so they have all these different places where Jesus have different scenes of him. But the truth is, it wasn't the real Jesus, okay? You could tell. Even the guy in the upper room who was an actor, not Jesus. Good guy, everything. So how do we know when we're around the real Jesus? That's what we're going to talk about today. How do we encounter or experience the living and loving Christ? That's what we want to talk about today. So we're going to talk about how we can touch and see the miracle of Jesus, just like the early disciples did. And one of the questions I want to answer for you is, how do we connect with this reality of Jesus? And if you're taking notes today, you can write these things down as we look at Luke chapter 24. How do we connect with the reality of Jesus? Well, the first thing I'd suggest to you today is through the peace given by Jesus. Through the peace given by Jesus. Let's look at the scriptures. Luke 24, beginning in verse 38. And while they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." Or the word in Hebrew he probably would have shared as shalom, be with you. Now this is interesting. Right after he says, "Be peaceful," he says that they're startled and frightened. He started away to say, "Hey, just relax. I'm the real Jesus." And then they get scared. They always seem to get scared, like he's a ghost or something. And thinking they saw a ghost, he said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts rise in your minds?" Now, the women had said they had seen the resurrected Jesus. Peter, James, and John talked about the resurrected Jesus. They had just seen Jesus on the road to Emmaus, and the disciples came back and said, "Jesus is real." They see him again, and they're still like, doubts rise in their mind. You see, one of the things I would suggest to you today is that when we know Christ, Christ begins to take away some of those doubts. He begins to give us a sense of shalom or peace. Now, peace isn't just absence of war. Sometimes when we think of peace, we think of like, well, there's no more fighting going on. But the word shalom means contentment. It means wholeness. It means completeness. And when we ask Christ to be real in our lives, what Christ does is he gives you this amazing benefit. He brings in through the power of the Holy Spirit a sense of contentment, a sense of knowledge that your life is complete and full. And so when you encounter those things of life that are not peaceful, like maybe you have to go on a move soon and you're packing your house and you're dealing with all this stuff, and you're going, "Oh, my house is crazy." And you go, "You know what? May the peace of Christ reside in your home." And what happens is you begin to understand that the presence of the living and loving Christ can calm all the struggles you're going through. Maybe you're going through a job transition. Maybe you're going through a struggle with your health right now. Maybe you're like me, you're getting a little older and you start to worry about all sorts of things that are falling apart with your body, And you start to go, well, but the peace of Christ can take care of that. And so if you're struggling today, I would encourage you to think about how can the peace of Christ and Christ's fullness help you deal with those issues where you're struggling today. The second thing, how do we connect with the reality of Jesus? Through the physical resurrection. Through the physical resurrection. You see, Jesus came back. He didn't come back as a ghost. He didn't come back as a spirit. In fact, that's why he kept telling them, and he would explain to them, "I am real. I am bodily resurrected. I'm not a ghost. I can eat food." Remember on the road to Emmaus? Last week we talked about where he took the bread and he broke it and ate with them. Today he's going to eat fish in a little bit. And the truth is that he wants to show them that he is the real Jesus. Again, look at the scriptures. Luke 24, he says, "Look at my hands and feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see I have." So in other words, he's challenging them to touch and see him. And see what Jesus does is he challenges all of us to kind of look for him, to find him, to see him. Now I want to share something with you. There's a physicist named Fred Alan Wolf. He wrote 2 books, Taking the Quantum Leap and Parallel Universes. If you want to look him up online, he has an interesting blog that just blows your mind, okay? But I love this conversation he has about seeing. This is something he said. "The universe does not exist independent of the thoughts of the observer." I'll say that again. The universe does not exist independent of the thoughts of the observer. Sort of back to the old argument, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody sees it, does it really happen? That same kind of thinking. He says, no, it doesn't. Without the thoughts of the observer, it really does not exist. He says it this way in plain language. You will see it when you believe it. You will see it when you believe it. His example of this is for a while, they only looked for Class M planets, planets that looked like Earth. But they began to realize that Class M planets only exist when there's a certain kind of sun. So what they began to do is they never saw those suns anywhere in the universe, but they began to start to look for them. All of a sudden, they came up in the hundreds. They began to find those things in quantum physics that they had never seen before. And then eventually, after finding those kinds of sun, then they found Class M planets nearby. So what does this mean? It means this. Simply put, you will see it when you believe it. They did not believe that Jesus was raised from the dead. So when he walked physically in front of them, they didn't see it because they weren't sure that it was really the Christ. What Jesus does for you and for me is he wants us to see him. Not just with our eyes, but with our head and with our hearts, and to understand that he is as real today as he was 2,000 years ago. Another way to think about it is this. There's a story about a shoe manufacturer who sends 2 people to a remote country in the Amazon forest to sell shoes. And when they get there, what happens is the shoe salesmen get there and they look through this Amazon jungle and they look that everybody does not have shoes. I mean, there's 5,000 people living in this jungle and none of them have shoes. So the first one writes home and goes, I'm in the Amazon jungle. I want to come home immediately. Nobody here has shoes. There's no way I could ever live down here. He writes back. The other guy writes back and goes, guess what? This is amazing territory. Nobody has shoes. Send me 5,000 pairs immediately. You see the difference? One sees the opportunity. The other sees only the missed opportunity because it's what they begin to see. The wrong perspective is imprisonment. The right perspective is empowerment. What Jesus gives us is the right perspective. Jesus gives us empowerment. He says, I want to release your thinking, the way you look at the world. I want you to see the world through hope, and I want you to see it through hope-filled eyes. So many times we get tunnel vision, and all we see are the things that are wrong in our life. All we see are the things that aren't happening that we want to have happen. But Jesus says, look through my eyes. See the things that I see, and you will see empowerment, not imprisonment. Neurologists tell us that one has to learn to see. Neurologists tell us that, in fact, even when we have eyes, our eyes really will not help us see. What helps us see is the way we think. There was a man by the name of Virgil, and he was from Oklahoma. He was 50 years of age. And Virgil, at the age of 50, regained his sight. They had a special surgery where they got rid of his cataracts. Literally, he had scales in front of his eyes. They also reconnected an optic nerve that had been damaged when he was born. And after this miraculous surgery, he physically had lenses. He physically had connections of those lenses to his brain. But you know what? He couldn't see. Even though he physically had the tangible opportunity to see, everything he looked at did not make sense to him. Because for 50 years, he only was able to touch and to move in darkness. So they had to retrain his thinking. They had to start really small and to begin to kind of just give him black and white views, if you will. They got him really close in a room, and they took everything out of the room except a few items so he could get used to looking at just one or two things. Then they began to expand his vision so he had one or two rooms. And then they began to expand his vision where they would take him outside for little pieces of it at a time. You see, he had to be retrained to see. You and I have to be retrained to see. That's why when Jesus comes to the disciples, he's saying, touch me and see. He's saying, you don't understand. I'm real. But because you haven't been retrained to think of the resurrection as real, you're not getting it. When Jesus becomes real in your life, you move from imprisonment to empowerment. You begin to see through the eyes of Jesus in a different way. But that can be scary. Just like Virgil, he was afraid to go outside because nothing made sense to him anymore. And when Jesus comes into your heart, sometimes things can be troubling. Things that become complicated because Jesus has a new way of sharing with you the world and showing you what to see and what's important. You see, what Jesus challenges us to do is he challenges us to not only see, but to touch and see, to experience him in a different way. Again, one of the ways that we touch and see is whenever we touch something, it becomes real to us, okay? Look at the person next to you right now. Do they look real to you? Does somebody sleep and just wake them up right now? That's okay, all right. Now touch their hand, literally touch their hand or put your arm around their shoulder. If you're not next to somebody, you can poke them behind you or in front of you, that's okay. You know they're real because you can touch them, right? There's a sense of they're not a figment of your imagination. They're not a hologram, okay? When we touch something, it becomes real. I'll give you an example of my own life. This being Mother's Day, I remember the first time I had baby Becca, okay? And Becca wasn't real to me. Rebecca was just kind of a thing that was going to happen in her life, okay? We were busy. I was in seminary. We were at Garrett Evangelical in Evanston, Illinois. Deb and I were working, going to classes, doing all these things, and all of a sudden we became pregnant. I know how it happens, but we weren't planning on it, and it just, we're like, oh, how are we going to fit this into our busy lives? We were waiting until after school got done, but God blessed us early. And so in my mind, it's like, yeah, a baby's a thing. It's real. I get it. But it wasn't until Becca was born that it made sense to me, that there was this living, loving person that was going to be a part of my life forever. And I remember when we brought baby Becca home, my best man at my wedding, a guy named Will, sent us this cute outfits to wear. I got a picture of them. It's when the Timberwolves were their first year playing. And Kevin Garnett was actually good and all those things. And so we have our Timberwolves jerseys on there, and there's baby Becca. We're snuggling with her. And I remember holding her, and then it became real. She wasn't just something that was going to happen to me. She wasn't a thing that I had to deal with. She was my daughter. She was real, and she was beautiful, and she would be a part of my life. Likewise, recently, my daughter, that little thing you see there, had a baby of her own. My daughter, Becca, had our grandson, Bellamy James. We call him Bames now, the nickname for short. And Deb and I were babysitting him the other day. She loves Grandma, but Dad just scares him. Look at him, look at me. He's like, what is that guy staring at me there? But again, BAMES was something that was going to happen. It was like, oh, my daughter's having a thing, and it's going to, happen someday. But again, it wasn't until all of a sudden I'm babysitting him again on Friday with Deb, and we're hanging out with him, and we're carrying him around. And it's like, this is my grandson. This is real. You see, Jesus wants you to be real in your life. Just like your kids, just like those close to you today, he wants you to touch and see. And the way we touch and see, we think, well, how can we touch and see Jesus? It doesn't make sense. He died 2,000 years ago, but we forget he was resurrected 2,000 years ago. And he's as real today as he was back then. The way we touch and see him is through the reading of his word, through prayer, through the body of Christ, the church. When we touch and see the body of Christ, the church, we're Jesus with skin on. You and I are the representation of Christ to a hurting world. One of the other ways we connect with Jesus, and this isn't always as exciting, but it's through the wounds of Jesus. Through the wounds of Jesus. You see, when Jesus came back, he could have came back with a resurrected body that was perfect. In fact, it says in the book of Revelations, when you and I come back from the dead, we'll be resurrected with a new body. The old will pass away and the new will come. There'll be a new sense of who we are. So if we are aged or we have a disease, all that's going to disappear. There's going to be no more tears in heaven. So why did Jesus come back with a wounded body? I think so that he could teach us and remind us that he was real. He came back with the holes in the hands. He came back with the holes in the feet. I think he lifted his cloak and he showed them the spear where he had been speared in the side. To remind them from the book of Isaiah, it says, by his stripes, by his wounds, that we would be healed. There's a concept called the wounded healer. And that concept is one that reminds us that when we go through difficult things, we lose a job, we become sick, we deal with cancer, we deal with abuse. Whatever that thing is that we deal with, the reality is that we can take that thing that has hurt us and we can use it, by using those scars, heal others. We can take the pain that has gone in our life and to tell others, you know what, I dealt with this thing, but now these scars can be a thing for healing. Maybe you've gone through a difficult experience. Maybe you've struggled with something in your life. But you know what, God can use that to not only heal you, but to heal others. He chose to keep the scars, I believe, because they were precious to him. That's how others would recognize him. That is still the way people recognize Jesus today. They recognize you and I when we're not ashamed to show the scars in our own lives. When we reveal the wounds that we are now healed and tell others about the healer who made it possible. This last week I saw, I would call it a testimony. I was actually quite surprised. It was a young athlete by the name of Kevin Durant. And maybe you're familiar with basketball and you followed his career, but he's the most valuable player in the NBA right now. He was given an award this week. On May 6th, they brought him out on stage, and they gave him an award. And typically, when you get these awards, you hear these guys talk about their talents or about thanking their coach or this types of things. But what I love about Kevin is he talked about his mom. You see, Kevin had grown up in a really difficult childhood. He was born into a single mom, or he had a single mom growing up with 4 children. Many times they were in transition. You could even use the word homeless. And his mom took care of him in spite of that. And she urged him to play basketball. And there were times when he says that she would actually at night go to bed without eating so he could have food. Can you imagine that? He remembers the first apartment they got because they were going from house to house and they had to live with different people and they had to live in different shelters. And he remembers how he felt, even though they had no furniture, that to live in that first apartment was like a castle. You see, he was wounded as a child. But now as an adult, he's a wounded healer. You see, he went to 2 different Christian high schools. And he's a strong Christian man. And he's used that witness, that testimony of Christ in his life to share with others. Here's a video clip of him talking about his mom. So as the lights come down, let's focus on this as well.
Our first apartment. No bed, no furniture. And we just all sat in the living room and just hugged each other. Because that's what we thought we made it. And when something good happens to you, I don't know about you guys, but I tend to look back to what brought me here. And you wake me up in the middle of the night in the summer times, making me run up a hill, making me do push-ups, screaming at me from the sideline of my games at 8 or 9 years old. We wasn't supposed to be here. You made us believe. You kept us off the street, put clothes on our backs, food on the table. When you didn't eat, You made sure we ate. You went to sleep hungry. You sacrificed for us. You the real MVP.
Tells his mom that she's the real MVP. She's the real MVP. He was wounded as a child. He struggled in a variety of ways, but as he came through that, through the power of Jesus Christ and going to a great Christian school, realizing that he was a great basketball player, encouragement of his mom, he's now a wounded healer. Like Christ, he's not afraid to show his scars. He's not afraid to show that he struggled growing up. But likewise, he's also able to encourage others because of that story. How do you use the wounds in your own life, the struggles that you've had, to encourage others? Last thing I want you to think about today is, how do we connect with the reality of Jesus? I would suggest to you it's through joy and amazement. Through joy and amazement. Again, let's look at scriptures, Luke chapter 24. It says, "And while they still did not believe it because of joy and amazement, he asked them, 'Do you have anything here to eat?' And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it, and he ate it in their presence." That understanding of joy and amazement, it's that word in the Greek of amazement is a sense of bewilderment. It's a sense of being overwhelmed with something, not quite understanding what's taking place. Sometimes it's even used in the context of magicians, where there's a sleight of hand or an illusion that they can't quite grasp. In that same way, Jesus says we can't quite grasp how amazing he is. But when we do get in his presence, we begin to feel differently. We begin to feel that sense of joy, and it becomes so precious, so overwhelming. It's a sense of encouragement at the same time, even if we can't understand it. The best example I could think of this in my own life is at first service here, we had a young couple who recently got engaged. And if you know them, it's Derek Wassell and Anna Marie. How many of you know Derek and Anna? Many of you do. Okay, congratulate them. They got engaged this last week. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. They're down the hall watching your children right now, so they're down at Kids Zone Worship. And Derek is just so fun, because you could just see how when he was so giddy, okay, that falling in love, deer in the headlights look, you know what I'm talking about, right? And so he was overwhelmed. When he went to go give the ring to her this week, he was on the porch, and he got down on his knees, and he goes, "Will you marry me?" Gets the box out, he has it turned the wrong direction, he can't open it up, and he's just like fumbling with the thing, and eventually she said yes, and he got it on the finger, all those good things. But have you ever had that kind of experience where you're so overwhelmed with love, with amazement, you can't figure it out? You're just like, oh. I've had some of those in my life. Maybe you have too. I remember one was actually when I was going to be wed at Hamlin University. I remember we went to the church where Deb and I went in college at Hamlin University Church, and that was where we had our wedding. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. I remember walking in with my 4 best friends and my brother, and we stood up front, and then I remember all the bridesmaids came down with their flowers, and they stood on the other side, and then I remember just the joy of that day and the amazement, and then the door opens in the back, and there comes my bride-to-be, and I'd never seen her dressed until she walked through that door. She'd always kept it a deep, dark secret, and she had the veil on and the 30-foot train, and she's standing next to some guy I think's her dad. I don't know, but I assumed it was. All I could do was see her coming down the aisle. And she was like an angel. I don't even think her feet moved. I think she just floated all the way down to the front, And I was so overwhelmed with joy and amazement. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think. I look at the video now, and I'm just a blubbering idiot. I'm like, all this kind of crying coming down. And I was standing there like a blubbering idiot, and the pastor's like kind of shoving me up. They're trying to get me to go grab her and bring her to the front of the stage. And the whole time, all I could think about is how beautiful she was, how amazing she was, and how we're going to spend the rest of our life together. You see, that's the kind of love we need to have for Jesus. That sense of how blessed we are to spend the rest of our life with him, here and for eternity. That sense of understand that he is resurrected, that he is real. When we touch and see him, we experience that kind of miracle. Whenever we spend time with him in prayer, when we're gathered around in our small groups and we talk about Jesus, when we're in worship and we're singing praises to him, we get filled with that joy and amazement. to get a taste of it right now, what I'd like to do for closing is I'd like you to stand. And I want to do is I want to gather, sort of like we do on Christmas. Up at Inver Grove Heights, you can do this with Pastor Russ up there as well. So I'd like you to come make a circle. Kind of move out from behind your chairs. Some of you come up and be scared to grab my hands. Come on up here. And I want you to make a big circle. Maybe we can go down these side aisles and to make a circle, like we kind of do at Christmas when we light the candles. And the reason is I want us to touch and see if you're feeling like maybe you have a cold today, you can touch elbows with somebody next to you, or you can grab hands. Some of you have to go to the back, where I think we can squeeze everybody in there. Jack, can you kind of go over and grab hands with those guys over there, make a full circle? You can include even our sound guy in there, Josh. He's a good guy sitting behind you. He thinks he can get out of it just because he's the sound guy, yeah? Now, the reason I'm demonstrating it this way is I want us to touch and see the miracle of Jesus. You see, many times we don't think about it, but we're Jesus with skin on. We're the miracle that Christ has sent and said, be the body for the world. Help the hurting. Reach out to those that are lost and left behind. And so the people in this room are amazing people. I love each and every one of you so much. Deb and I are blessed to be your pastors. And you guys are the miracle of Christ. You are the Jesus with skin on. You're the representation of Christ to the world. And whenever you go out of here, just think about that. Whenever you touch somebody else and you witness to the love of Jesus Christ in the world, you're allowing Christ's love to be made known. You're bringing peace with you, just as Jesus had come, experience peace. You are bringing a sense of woundedness and a wounded healer concept to the world. You are Jesus. Let us pray.